Hello, I'm Pastor Marie-Louise Nangwa from Douala in Cameroon. Welcome to the program Let's Master Spiritual Law. Today we will study the first part of the following theme: spiritual status and its impact on the enjoyment of the promises of God. We have seen in the preceding lesson related to the root cause of the non-fulfillment of the promises of God that the means of fulfilling a promise required either the use of power alone or the combination of law and power. I would like us to consider the following question: in what case must the law be used? In which case the use of power alone is sufficient? Let us return to the three cases of examples of execution of God's promises that we studied under the previous theme. First, the promise related to the deliverance of the people of Israel from Egypt. Second, the promise related to the blessing of Sarah's bowels. Third, the promise related to the Savior's birth through Mary. Why in two of these cases the power was enough to solve the problem, and in another it took more than the use of the letter? What do these three recipients of the promises have in common? What makes them different? Let us look at the social condition of the people involved, their situation in relation to the society in which they lived. Our observation shows that in Egypt, the people of Israel were captives and slaves. They did not enjoy freedom of movement. They had become the property of Egypt because a slave belonged to his master. The people of Israel were not free to leave Egypt or not. Sarah, Abraham's wife, was not captive. She was a free woman, free to choose whether to give birth or not. Mary, although she lived in a Roman province, was not a captive woman. For Judea was just subject to paying a tribute to Rome, but individual and religious liberties were maintained. Mary was free to choose to give birth or not. We can notice that for Sarah and Mary, who were free, the use of the power was sufficient. While for the people of Israel who were captive, it was necessary to add to the use of power the resolution of a law issue. We can therefore conclude that in these different cases, the social condition of the beneficiary of the promise have determined the type of solution to bring. Because the condition we are talking about here, the situation of captivity or liberty, have legal implication, it is more correct to talk about the term status. So as an answer to the question of when to use the law and when to use the power, I will say this: the status of a person determines the type of solution to be deployed to enable the fulfillment of the promises of God. Let me say it again. The status of a person determines the type of solution to be deployed to fulfill the promises of God in his life. Some of you, highly rational, will tell me that we cannot generalize from this one case, that it may be a coincidence. So let us look if there is another example confirming the impact of status on the fulfillment of God's promises. Let us study the case of Daniel in Babylon. Daniel is the servant of God who was taken captive to Babylon during his youth and held high office in that nation later. He was a prophet, and after had a revelation announcing a great calamity, he undertook to humble himself before the Lord by observing a fast. After 21 days of fasting, an angel appeared to him and told him this language. Then he said to me, "Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the king of Persia." We note in this passage that God responded to Daniel's prayer immediately after he prayed, and sent an angel to give him that answer. The angel in question was delayed for 21 days by the king of Persia. Daniel's response was delayed for 21 days. The persons who ruled Persia at that time as king had nothing against the God of Israel and nothing against his people. The proof is that it was one of them named Cyrus who ordered the end of captivity of the people of Israel in Babylon. They could not therefore oppose a communication between an angel sent by God and Daniel. The king of Persia, whom this passage refers to, represents a domination, the spirit controlling this area, the spirit having a right in this place. This spirit did not want God's answer to Daniel to reach him. In this case too, we find that Daniel's status has affected the transmission of God's response to his prayer. Let us note that Daniel was a captive. Daniel's status has delayed the accomplishment of the promise of God contained in Jeremiah 33 verse 3. "Call to me and I will answer you." How many answers to Christian prayers are delayed or blocked? How many promises are thus blocked in their process of fulfillment? Some will say, "Praise the Lord, I am not concerned by this type of problem because I am not in captivity. I am a free man living in a free country, so I can rely exclusively on the use of power." As a reminder, the Bible teaches us in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23 that every human being is made up of a body, a soul, and a spirit. The body is that material part that we can touch, that allows us to move. The spirit is a part invisible to the naked eye, but yet very real, which allows us to commune with God, who is spirit. The soul is also an invisible part, the seat of the will, the feelings, and the intelligence. To assert that a three-party entity is not captive, one should be reassured that none of the three parties is captive. It is therefore important for those who feel free to ask themselves whether their soul is also free or whether their spirit is also free. Let us remember that just as the physical body can be captive, there is a spiritual captivity and a soul captivity. There are several spiritual statuses or spiritual conditions. The examples studied above have highlighted the spiritual status of captivity. But the most known spiritual statuses are the status of blessed, when a person is under a blessing, and the status of cursed, when a person is under a curse. Do not hesitate to subscribe to the Kingdom of God channel In order to receive all the next videos, just press the red button, subscribe, below this video. Before conducting an in-depth study of the different spiritual statuses, I would like to demonstrate the statement that follow from the title of our lesson. Indeed, I told you in the last chapter that a normal curses must be made of demonstration and not mere statements. I would like to demonstrate that the spiritual status of a man has an impact on the enjoyment of the promises of God. I want to reassure each other that this is not just a whimsical statement. To say that the spiritual status of a man influences his physical life is to say that the spiritual world, the invisible world, influences the lives of men. Let us focus on the story of Job. Job is a man who lived between the 80th and 6th century before Christ. The story of Job is that of a rich, honest, and just man who in one day was struck by serious misery, from the loss of all his riches to the death of his 7 children. As that were not enough, Job was afflicted with a serious skin condition that was causing him pain. Faced with this situation, his friend visited him, and while he cried over his misfortune, they believed that he necessarily has hidden sins justifying the punishment he was undergoing. At the end of the book, Job has been comforted by the Lord, who makes him prosper doubly and give him other children. This book is generally presented by Bible scholars as the one who posed the problem of the suffering of the righteous, which raises the problem of suffering as a punishment for sin. For me, the most striking fact of the book of Job is that it reveals the influence of the invisible on the visible, the influence of the spiritual world on the lives of men. Why such a statement? Well, let us read in Job 1, verse 6 to 12. Now there was a day when the Son of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hand, and his possession have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. This passage presents an event that occurred sometime before the misfortune of Job in the invisible world. It is a conversation between two spiritual beings, namely God and Satan, in the presence of other spiritual beings who are the Son of God, of angels. After Satan claimed that he was returning from visiting the earth, God, very proud of his servant Job, boasted of him before the devil, testifying that the latter was leading a righteous life. Satan believed that Job's behavior was not a fit because God has not only blessed him, but he has protecting all his possessions and all those who were dear to him, all his beloved one. Satan then challenged God, claiming that if Job lost his property, he would curse him in the face. God decided to show Satan that Job's attachment was sincere and selfless, giving him all that belonged to him. He voluntarily gave up blessing and protecting Job in order to test the latter and allowed Satan to attack his property. Overnight, Job's life was turned upside down. The passage of Job 1, verse 13 to 19 relates the series of misfortunes that plagued Job's life. We can read the first misfortune of Job in Job 1, verse 13 to 15. Now there was a day when his sons and daughter were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were ploughing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servant with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The second misfortune is described in Job 1, verse 16. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servant and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The third misfortune of Job is in Job 1, verse 17. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away. Yes, and killed the servant with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The fourth, the worst, the most painful of misfortunes, likely intended to bring him the coup de grâce, is described in Job 1, verse 18 to 19. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughter were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. The conversation between 2 unseen beings presented in Job 1, verse 6 to 12 has resulted in a terrible decision from God. Behold, all that he has is on your power. God has put all that belonged to Job under the power of Satan. Through this decision, Satan received the green light from God to destroy everything that belonged to Job. I would like that, by way of summary, we answer to question relating to the origin of the misfortunes of Job. What caused Job's first misfortune? What caused the kidnapping of Job's oxen and donkeys, and the killing of the servant who guarded them? We read in Job 1, verse 15 that Sabaeans, coming from an enemy country of the land of Job, instrumentalized by Satan in the execution of the decision of God, caused that misfortune. What took away Job's camels and killed those who guarded them? We read in Job 1 verse 17 that 3 bands made up of enemy of the people of God, called Chaldeans, was responsible of that misfortune. What consumed Job's sheep and the servant who kept them? We read in Job 1 verse 16 that the fire of God was responsible of that misfortune. It is a supernatural fire, a fire of supernatural origin, provoked by Satan as the execution of the decision authorizing him to destroy everything that belonged to Job. What caused the death of Job's children? A wind from the desert was overturned the 4 walls, the 4 corners of the house. According to the witnesses, it was an unfortunate accident due to a natural disaster. But where did this wind come from? Which coincidentally executed the decision of God, of which Satan was in charge. Who sent this wind? It came into execution of the decision made by God in the world of the invisible. At the end of Satan's execution of God's decision, Job lost his flock, his sheep, his children. He lost everything that belonged to him as stipulated by this decision of the invisible world. Is it not this proof that natural disaster, fire, robbery, and death can be consequences of an influence of this spiritual world? As we continue reading the book of Job, we realize that despite these misfortunes, Job did not curse God and even bless him. God, happy to have been right about Job, mentioned this at the next sitting in the spirit world. We can read in Job 2 verse 3 to 8. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. This second conversation between two spiritual beings also ended in another decision or agreement concerning the bones and flesh of Job. "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." To carry out the previous decision, Satan has used instruments such as Sabaean, supernatural fire, and wind. This time, he struck Job himself. Verse 7 of Job 2 clearly tells us that Satan struck Job with a malignant ulcer. It is a skin disease characterized by the appearance of purulent and itchy lesions. Satan, being an invisible being, a spiritual being, is it not this proof that, according to the Bible, certain diseases can be the consequence of an influence of the spiritual world? What can we conclude from this passage? First conclusion. We can conclude that Job's story is proof that our professional success, our relationship with others, our health can be influenced by the spiritual world. It is clear that the decision of the spiritual world can affect the life of men. Second conclusion. This story of Job brings us to the definition of blessed spiritual status. What characterizes a blessed man? We learn from Satan's mouth that it was because God has blessed Job and protected him that he feared Job. Job 1 verse 10 said, "Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hand, and his possession have increased in the land." Satan said, "You have blessed." According to Satan, it was because Job was blessed that he prospered, and his wealth was the consequence of spiritual status. Thus, a blessed man, a man who is under a blessing, is a man who has been declared by the spiritual world as having to enjoy certain favors. We can also say that a blessed man is the one who enjoys the promises of God. Third conclusion. Job's story allows us to define the cursed spiritual status. What characterizes a cursed man? When God decided to put Job under the power of Satan, he decided to stop blessing him. The status of Job changed. He ceased to be blessed and found himself under the influence of a decision of the spiritual world, aiming to make him pass through a series of misfortunes and sufferings. His material prosperity flies away, a serial illness occurs. The new spiritual status which is now that of cursed. Job becomes a cursed man. A cursed man is a man under the influence of a curse, a man under the influence of a decision of the spiritual world or invisible world aimed at harming his interest. Fourth and last conclusion. The transition from the spiritual status of blessed to that of cursed has brought Job's misfortunes. The change in Job's spiritual status deprived him of the enjoyment of God's promises. So the spiritual status of a person has an impact on the enjoyment of God's promises in his life. What needed to be demonstrated? I invite you to subscribe to this channel, Came of God channel, in order to receive all the next video. Just press the red button subscribe below this video. God bless you.